If willpower worked, you wouldn't be here. And that's not an insult. That's proof you were taught the wrong strategy. Because addiction doesn't beat you by being stronger. It beats you by being smarter. And in the next 20 minutes, I'll show you how to flip that advantage without motivation, discipline, or trying harder. Stay till the end, because the final rule is the one nobody talks about. And it's the reason most people relapse after they think they've won. Quick disclaimer, this isn't therapy. This isn't encouragement, and this isn't believe in yourself nonsense. This is mechanics. Once you understand the system behind addiction, it stops feeling personal and starts feeling predictable. And predictable systems can be controlled. Why addiction feels unbeatable. Let's kill the biggest lie first. Addiction is not about weakness. If it were, strong people wouldn't relapse. Smart people wouldn't spiral. Successful people wouldn't hide it. Addiction survives because it hijacks a survival circuit. Your brain doesn't say, I want pleasure. It says, I need relief. And when relief feels scarce, logic shuts down. That's why shame never fixes addiction. It feeds it. Because shame increases stress, and stress is the trigger. Now here's the part most people never realize. You don't relapse randomly. You relapse on schedule. Let me show you the loop. The addiction loop. Exposed. Every addiction runs the same cycle. Trigger, urge, action, dopamine, temporary relief, crash, repeat. Most people attack the action, but the brain doesn't care about the action. It only cares about the dopamine prediction. That's why quitting feels like something is missing, because something is. Not the habit, the reward. Break the reward loop, and the habit collapses on its own. So how do you interrupt a loop that feels automatic? You don't fight it head-on. You wait for it to blink. The 90-second rule. Here's a neurological fact most people don't know. A craving by itself lasts 60 to 90 seconds. That's it. It only continues if you think about it, argue with it, fantasize about it, or label it as dangerous. The moment you engage, you reset the timer. That's why people say, I fought it for hours. No, you fed it for hours. Cravings don't need strength. They need attention. Remove attention, and they starve. But here's the catch. Most people don't relapse because of cravings. They relapse because of panic. Why denial backfires? The second you say, I can never do this again, your brain hears something important is being taken away. And the brain treats loss as a survival threat. That triggers threat response. Threat response shuts down logic. And when logic shuts down, impulse takes over. This is why denial feels powerful at first, and then fails later under pressure. Because denial doesn't create control. It creates panic. And panic always asks one question. How do I make this feeling stop right now? Your addiction already knows the answer. So if denial creates panic, and panic kills control, then the solution isn't resistance. It's delay. Because delay removes urgency. And without urgency, addiction loses its teeth. So never deny. Delay. Delay, don't deny. Here's the rule that changes everything. Never say, I'm quitting forever. Say this instead. Not now, I'll decide in 10 minutes. That's it. One sentence. But neurologically it flips the entire game. Why delay works. When you delay, 3 things happen instantly. First, urgency disappears, and addiction cannot survive without urgency. Second, pressure drops. No pressure means your nervous system stays calm. Third, your brain stays online. Logic doesn't shut down. Impulse doesn't take over. You didn't say no, so your brain doesn't panic. You didn't say yes, so the habit doesn't activate. You created a pause, and control lives in pauses. But here's the catch. Delay buys you time. It doesn't end the craving. Because addiction doesn't live in thought, it lives in the body. And if you don't change your state next, the urge will come back louder. Change your state. Non-negotiable. You have 10 seconds to break the loop physically. Do 1. Cold water on your face, 30 push-ups, fast walking, or breath control. Inhale 4, exhale 6. Why this works? Addiction thrives in passive states, still body or racing mind. Movement flips the nervous system. Cold shocks attention. Breath control slows urgency. No signal means no craving. You're not fighting the urge, you're cutting its power source. When you combine delay with movement, you turn addiction from a command into a suggestion. And suggestions don't control behavior. You're no longer reacting, you're deciding. But even this isn't enough long term, because if you remove the habit without replacing the reward, your brain will demand it back. And that's where most people relapse, weeks after they think they've won. Why people relapse after doing well. Here's the most dangerous phase of addiction recovery. Not the beginning, not the withdrawals, and not the first few days. It's the moment you think, I'm good now. Because that's when the real trap opens. They remove the habit, but forget to replace the reward. Your brain doesn't miss the behavior, it misses the dopamine certainty. Take that away with no substitute, and the brain revolts. That's when people say, I don't know what happened. Yes, you do. You removed pleasure and replaced it with discipline. Discipline always loses long term. Discipline can get you clean, but it cannot keep you clean. Because discipline is effort, and the brain always looks for shortcuts. If the shortcut still exists, it will be used. So if relapse happens after you're doing well and not because of cravings, then the solution isn't more control. It's replacing the reward your brain is still hunting. And that's exactly what we're breaking down next. Replace the reward, not the habit. Ask one question. What was this giving me? Was it stress relief? Escape? Control? Comfort? Stimulation? Certainty? Until you answer this honestly, you're fighting shadows. You don't replace the habit. You replace the dopamine pattern. Same reward, different source. That's how rewiring works. Examples. Replace. Stress with intensity. Hard workout, loud music, cold exposure. Boredom with novelty. Learning, building, creating. Loneliness with connection. Voice notes, conversations, journaling. Anxiety with grounding. Breathing, structure, routine. The brain doesn't care how it gets dopamine. It only cares that it gets it. Here's the brutal truth. If your life has less pleasure after quitting, you will go back. Not because you're weak, but because your brain is logical. So the goal isn't purity, it's sustainable satisfaction. Now this next part is subtle, but deadly if you ignore it. Identity is the real addiction. This is the quiet part nobody warns you about. Even after you change the habit, even after you replace the reward, people still relapse. Not because of cravings, because of identity. Never say, I'm addicted. That turns a behavior into identity, and identity is sticky, so the brain protects it. Instead, say, I'm someone who sometimes experiences urges. That's not denial, that's precision. You're describing a state, not a self. States change. Identities resist. You're not broken. You're in transition. Change the label, and the behavior loosens. Now let's remove the biggest psychological trap. Why forever makes you fail? There's one word that quietly destroys more progress than any craving. That word is forever. Your brain can't process forever. It only understands now. That's why lifetime promises create pressure. Pressure creates stress, and stress triggers relapse. Think about it. Saying, "I won't do this today," feels manageable. But saying, "I won't do this for the rest of my life," feels crushing. Same action, different framing, completely different nervous system response. So shrink the goal. If forever creates pressure, and pressure kills control, then the smartest move isn't commitment, it's narrowing the battlefield. One day, one window, one decision at a time. And that leads to the rule that changes everything next. The 24-hour rule. This is where everything simplifies. No forever, no pressure, no identity crisis. Just 24 hours. You don't quit addiction for life. You quit it today. That's it. Addiction collapses without daily reinforcement. Every clean day rebuilds self-trust. Momentum beats motivation. Every single time. Here's the part most people miss. Addiction doesn't collapse from willpower. It collapses from lack of repetition. And the 24-hour rule starves repetition. One day at a time isn't weak. It's surgical. Now, there's just one last piece. Because even with daily wins, even with identity shifts, even with replacement rewards, there's a mistake that can undo everything if you don't know how to handle it. And it happens after a slip. What to do after a slip? This part matters more than anything else, because most damage doesn't happen during the slip. It happens after. If you slip, do not spiral. One mistake does not undo progress. Never ask, "What's wrong with me?" Ask, "What part of the system failed?" Fix the system, not your worth. Within 10 minutes of a slip, do something grounding. Walk, shower, breathe, move. Why? Because you must interrupt the shame spiral before it becomes the next trigger. You're not fixing the slip, you're stopping the second one. And when you stop spiraling, something strange happens. Control stops feeling like effort. Freedom stops feeling fragile. And the addiction quietly loses relevance. That's the real endgame. At this point, you've probably noticed something. The real goal isn't to eliminate urges. It's to make them irrelevant. Not scary, not dramatic, just manageable. This was never about quitting a habit. It was about regaining control. Once you control the loop, the addiction loses leverage. And once leverage is gone, freedom becomes boring. If this helped, even a little, you're not weak. You were just fighting blind. Don't scroll away. Subscribe. Not for motivation, not for hype, but for systems that work when motivation disappears. Because control isn't a feeling, it's something you build.